Hello, everyone. Welcome to Social Media Lab Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us today in person, and thank you to those of you who are joining us virtually. The Social Media Lab Study is a group of students and practitioners who exchange ideas and debate key issues associated with social media and new media research. I am Irina Gora, and I'm a research assistant here at the Social Media Lab and an MSCM student at Ted Rogers School of Management. For those of you who are not familiar with our lab, the Social Media Lab is an interdisciplinary research lab at Ryerson University. The lab studies how social media is changing the way people and organizations communicate, share information, conduct business, and form communities online, and how these changes impact our society. I am delighted to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Jagris Hodson. Dr. Hodson is an associate professor and program head at Royal Roads University in British Columbia. Her research focuses on understanding how people interact with digital technologies, such as social media, and the content that is produced and shared using these technologies. Dr. Hodson recently spent some time in Ottawa as a MITAC's Canadian Science Policy Fellow. The presentation today came out of that fellowship. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming Dr. Hodson, who will be speaking today on online information and misinformation about environmental issues, the paradox of what we think we know versus what we actually know.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming today. I know it's cold and snowy out there in Toronto, and I think transit wasn't working quite right this morning, so that we're all here is wonderful. My name is Dr. Jagris Hodson, and I'm an associate professor in the College of Interdisciplinary Studies at Royal Roads University. And as Irina noted, this study comes in part from my work with the Government of Canada on a MITAC's Canadian Science Policy Fellowship, and also comes in part from SSHRC-funded research that I conducted with a team at Royal Roads, including Anne Dale, Mary Bernard, Francois Jost, and Jamie Lee Clifton. So we wanted to look at how people engage with online issues, particularly issues when they involve the environment and sustainability. So we decided to talk to people about how they were engaging online, what tools they were using, and what their knowledge of social issues and environmental issues were. And I think we did not expect to find potential gaps or areas where misinformation could be an issue. Now, this represents an exploratory study and almost raises as many questions as it answers. So I'm excited to show you today what we learned and maybe pose some of those questions to the group so we can think more deeply about what people think they know versus what they actually do and engage with online. So of course, we're all familiar with Greta Thunberg. She's made international headlines this year when she began her climate strike, and that sort of picked up steam and lit a fire across young people all over the world. Now, in fact, we often think that individuals under the age of 35 are the ones who are going to change the world. They're changing politics, they're agitating, they're protesting, and some people think that they are using online tools to do so. Of course, this is not a new claim. Ever since we started using the internet to connect with one another, and particularly participatory technologies, there was this idea that we could organize without organizations, or form smart mobs, or otherwise use these technologies to agitate on the issues that matter to us. And it was thought that young people were going to do this. Now, since participatory technologies have been developed and studied, we've learned that in some cases, yes, they can indeed propel movements forward. However, we also notice that there are some limitations and challenges in doing so, and the potential of these technologies to enhance democratic discourse or create a network public sphere or encourage even mass education on topics like climate change still sometimes remains limited in practice, and instead we can also see the downside, like the spread of misinformation. Now, of course, these digital forms of protest exhibit these great potential for moving the needle. But on the other hand, some scholars critique them for encouraging maybe slacktivism at best or clicktivism, and at the worst, spreading information that could be detrimental to our health and to society. So in this study, we wanted to see two things. How are young people using the internet to engage with social issues and issues of sustainability? And what is their perception of what sites or platforms or information they can turn to online to find out more about social issues and social sustainability. And then we also wanted to see if what they're telling us they're doing in practice and what they're perceiving that they're doing are sort of lining up. So our research suggests that there could be a major gap between what people know and know they can trust online and then what they actually do when they're using these tools. And this finding has major implications for anybody who's talking about social issues, but particularly we're interested in the implications for people communicating about environmental and sustainability issues. So I'm going to start with a bit of a literature review today. I'm going to address social media and social issues, going to talk a little bit about perceived knowledge, Slacktivism, and the Dunning-Kruger effect. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about our methods, show you some results, and then have a discussion of what those results could mean. Finally, at the end, I'm going to open it to questions. So, social media and social issues. As mentioned, social media has great potential, as we've seen with the Me Too movement, or even the climate strikes, to move social issues forward, to inform people, and to sort of let people know about when a protest might be happening or other ways that they can get involved with social issues. But it doesn't always live up to that potential in practice. We know that social media can encourage collective action. It connects multiple concerned citizens from around the world, and it can be really useful on a global scale. It's enabled new methods of participation. It's encouraged some populations to engage with issues. Facilitates new ways for civil society actors to have a voice. They don't need to go through conventional channels. And we know that young people prefer to engage with social issues using digital media platforms. So that is their preferred method of learning about these things. However, there is some evidence to suggest that among millennials, an increase in social media use could decrease actual on-the-ground efforts like attending a protest. And some scholars think that this means that people feel like when they've engaged with something online, they're done and they don't need to do anything more with that. So there's conflicting evidence as to whether social media engagement actually results in meaningful change or mobilization. Issues like environmental issues is connected more with mainstream media coverage than it is with social media. Even though social media can sometimes amplify that mainstream media coverage, they seem to need both in order to pick up steam. When people share news about environmental issues like climate change on social media, they're tending to do so in responses to other events that have been covered in the mainstream media, like the climate strike initiated by Thunberg. So this suggests that social media alone may not increase engagement in the absence of a sort of ecological model of how media works. And we know, too, that traditional use of social media by, for example, government organizations still conforms to a broadcast model of communication. And some scholars think that the profit motive that drives social media platforms forward, this need to make money by providing eyeballs to advertisers, actually limits its ability to empower democratic deliberation and that kind of communication. Now, Slacktivism, of course, has been defined in the literature as actions that are performed on the internet for a social cause but have little impact in changing things on the real world or by getting people out. It's often used in a pejorative way, and it is assumed that online actions like clicking a link or sharing a video are preempting other more meaningful forms of engagement like writing a letter or participating in a protest. However, the question remains, do they? And if so, why are we expecting people to go out and, participate in a protest or write a letter? And why are we diminishing those things that they do online? So there's reasons to believe that Slacktivism is potentially overblown and may not result in a decrease of engagement. But we do need to know whether participating online, consuming this knowledge, and growing in your understanding of an issue is enough to be considered real engagement with that issue. Now, social media actually might tend to result in more people knowing about an issue or signing an online petition. Now, on the other hand, these platforms also increase a sense of individualism, a self rather than other focus, and maybe a decline in empathy for others, although the jury is still out for that. Studies have shown that YouTube videos can increase the perceived importance of an environmental issue like climate change. So we need to ask, is that enough? Does perceived importance translate to a movement on the ground? Now people understand that this is more important than it was before. However, other studies have found evidence that at least in some contexts, there may be reason to believe that online engagement can and does lead to changes in behavior. So maybe people who demonstrate online engagement might be more likely to vote in elections, for example. So that doesn't sound so much like Slacktivism to me, but we'll return to this idea later. Another thing that you need to consider when you're talking about how people are consuming information online and whether it's going to lead to social change is what that information is doing for the person. So is the information confirming something that somebody already knows, or is it giving them new information that is based on what we know, fact-based, on-the-ground science, like we were talking about earlier today? So research suggests that people seek out information based on emotion rather than reason, and they like to tend to confirm their already existing points of view. Research also shows that people who know very little about an issue tend to overestimate their knowledge of an issue. And that could be problematic if we are sharing what little we know about the issue and that information is wrong. People like to perceive themselves in a favorable light, and this includes their level of knowledge. We all like to think we're smart. I don't think anybody would argue with that. But perceived level of knowledge on a topic or issue is often correlated with lack of knowledge, or the creation of impossible knowledge. This means facts that don't actually exist, or in another context could be misinformation. And this tendency is exacerbated when the knowledge is political in nature, because partisanship leads people to dig in on information that confirms their beliefs. Research also suggests that when people have a high perceived level of knowledge about an issue, they will be less likely to seek out information about that issue. They think they already know, so why go look for additional information? So that contradicts some of the things that we learned earlier about, for example, going to YouTube to learn more about an issue, such as climate change. And fortunately, there's also an inverse relationship between information seeking and perceived knowledge. In contrast, it actually takes objective knowledge, new knowledge, education, for example, rather than perceived knowledge in order to drive action. So information-seeking behavior is correlated with sharing information on an issue rather than misinformation. For example, there's research by McNeil and Vaughan in 2012 that examined high school students' perceived knowledge of climate change, their education about the issue, and their intentions to act. And they found that while perceived knowledge of climate change was initially high amongst participants, it was only after education gave them objective knowledge and an understanding of specific concepts that participants indicated they were engaging in actions. So needing that additional, not perceived knowledge, but additional, objective knowledge is what could lead to action on a sustainability issue. And then finally, why do people engage with content online? Why are people seeking out information on an issue? Oftentimes it's relational. So, for example, susceptibility to interpersonal influence can drive information seeking. What does that mean, really? It's peer pressure. We're information seeking in order to belong to our relational groups. So with all that in mind, we had a few questions that we wanted to ask of young people. So this, again, is an exploratory study, and we just wanted to take the pulse of what was out there to see if we could create any recommendations, basically, for sustainability communication. So how do students use social media platforms to engage with issues? What do they perceive their knowledge of social issues to be? And then, interestingly enough, what could be the differences between reported and actual use of social media and at the time that we surveyed our students? So we developed the survey protocol using Lime Survey, and we delivered the surveys to a variety of students in undergraduate courses at Royal Roads University in Victoria, British Columbia. Now, these students were from across programs, so there were some who had a deep knowledge of environmental issues because they were in the program of studying environmental practice or environmental management. But we also had commerce students, students in business administration, communication, hotel management, and tourism management. We administered the survey from March to May 2018 in 12 undergraduate programs. Most students took 20 to 30 minutes to complete the survey. 300 students were invited to take the survey, and the final number of responses was 203. We did a post hoc analysis with pairwise Fisher's exact tests to determine relationships between perceived knowledge of social issues and other variables. And of course, we focused our analysis on all adjusted significant p-values. So as I mentioned, 203 people took the survey. 59.1% of participants were 18 to 24. 30% were 25 to 34, and about 11% were above the age of 45. 109 of the participants were indicated female, 87% indicated male, and 7% indicated other gender orientations. Most were from Vancouver Island, which makes sense because that's where Royal Roads is, but we did have a few people from elsewhere in Canada, and also we had some students from China and Mexico. So we began by asking them about what social media sites they use in their personal lives, what was most important to them. And participants told us that for them, YouTube was the most important website, and this confirms some of the things we already know about how younger people are using social media. Of course, followed by Instagram and Facebook. The least important were Flickr and Tumblr, and the rest fell somewhere in the middle. This reflects the trends in social media that the Social Media Lab has been so good about detailing for us. And this shows that YouTube and Instagram use is growing among young people. Facebook remains widely used, with active use falling among certain demographics. We asked also our participants what sources of information they feel they most trust. And so this list represents an aggregate trust rating, so about what everybody told us which ones were the most trusted to the least trusted. Now you can see, clearly our students have had it drilled into their heads that academic journals are where you can go to trust, information. But then they indicated government websites, followed by research websites, then news, ebooks, online magazines, blogs, Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit finally was the least trusted. We asked them to tell us what they thought was most engaging content. Again, this is an aggregate rating of the whole group. Interestingly enough, I found this very interesting, and we'll come back to this later. They indicated that news was most engaging, so national and local news. Then they said issue-based content, and then science, followed by how-to or instructional type content, practical advice, inspirational. Entertainment was near the bottom, along with cute. And then sports, finally, they said was the least engaging. Now we're going to come back to this because I think those of us who study social media would say, well, we've learned maybe that entertainment content and cute content tends to be quite engaging, but this was not what our student participants were reporting they found most engaging. We asked them about their level of knowledge of social issues and also their level of knowledge of environmental issues. Most reported their level of knowledge of social issues as average, but we had more people report that their level of knowledge was very good rather than low or little to no knowledge. This was correlated with the reported level of knowledge for environmental issues. So, for example, if they reported a very good level of knowledge in social issues, they were more likely to report a very good level of knowledge of environmental issues. We wanted to know about how they're engaging with different types of content. I can't get into all of them here, but one will become apparent later. We asked them about their frequency reading blogs. And results from the test of associations indicated that students who considered themselves to possess a very good level of knowledge of social issues differed significantly in their frequency of reading blogs when compared with students who considered themselves to possess an average or low level of knowledge of social issues. So all participants who indicated they had a very good knowledge indicated they spent time reading blogs at least once per month, and 61% read blogs daily. In contrast, only 34% of participants who indicated an average knowledge read blogs daily, and 27% of participants who indicated a low level of knowledge read blogs daily. We also see interesting differences in daily hours spent online. About 97.5% of respondents who self-report having either average or very good knowledge of social issues spend 3 or more hours per day online. Most participants spent a daily average of 3 hours online. However, proportionally more students, so about 39% who reported possessing an average knowledge level on social issues, indicated spending the most time online. So if I think I have an average knowledge of social issues, I'm going to spend more time online than people who think that they possess very good or low levels of knowledge of social issues, which is very interesting when we consider the literature on information seeking, right? So we're seeing the people with a very good level of knowledge maybe confirming some of that literature. They're not necessarily spending as much time online if they're going online to search for information. So in contrast to asking them what they wanted to report that they found most engaging, and what they wanted to report that they found most trustworthy, we also wanted to get an idea of what they were doing in practice. So we also asked them, what content have you most recently interacted with online? And what content have you most recently shared? Because the reporting on what they have most recently interacted with will hopefully give us a little bit of a snapshot into their life and what they are finding engaging, they're interacting with and sharing it, rather than having to report, from a drop-down list on a survey, oh yeah, definitely, I find news engaging. So when we asked them to tell us what they had most recently interacted with, and then we coded it based on the same categories that we used in the survey to ask them about what they thought was most trustworthy and most engaging, we find a very different picture. So if you remember, we asked them what they said was most engaging, and they said, oh yeah, I find national news, local news, issues-based content, etc. most engaging. But what have you interacted with most recently? Well, the list looks quite different. Entertainment is at the top. So 42 of our respondents interacted with entertainment-based content, and then next was how-tos and instructional, then news, then sports, which was at the bottom of our previous list when we asked them what they thought they found most engaging, then issue-based. Cute is still low on the list, but not as low. And inspirational, and then there were some that couldn't be categorized. And then content sharing is another way to discuss engagement or to understand engagement. So what have you most recently shared? Now, people who perceived they had average or above average knowledge of social issues were more likely to report sharing information online just generally. So if I think I have average or above average knowledge, I'm going to share that information. And this was interesting because people in our survey who self-reported a very good level of knowledge of social and environmental issues also reported that they spent less time online than the other groups, but they were more likely to share. When they're sharing, we're seeing people report to us that they're sharing entertainment, they're sharing national and local news next, so that's still near the top of the list. They're sharing how-tos, then they're sharing issues-based, then inspirational, practical advice. A large proportion, relatively large proportion, like 26 out of our total 203 people said that they don't share. And those people would generally be on the average or below level of feeling like they have a knowledge of social issues. So we also asked them why. Why did you interact with the content that you did? And about 15% told us that they interacted with content that was related to family, friends, or their extended social circle. So either somebody that I love posted, or one of my friends posted. And then 29% said that they shared in order to connect with family, friends, or colleagues. Oh, I shared this because I thought that my friend would like it, or I missed them. Or I shared this because I really, wanted my family to know about this. And then finally, we asked them about whether they were likely or might in the future or had in the past participate in an initiative that required an action more than just sharing something online. So in this case, we use the Ice Bucket Challenge as an example for them, like, if you were to participate in something like this, or have you participated in something like this in the past, and if you would, why? If you wouldn't, why not? Here's what they told us. So 161 respondents actually answered the question. 82 said they'd never participate and they wouldn't participate. They said it was pointless and a waste of time. And they said people did it to get attention, or that it was too trendy, or that they were just worried about their privacy concerns. They don't like to share. 40 of our participants had participated. They said they did because they believed in the cause, or participation was fun, or they wanted to be included socially. And then 37 stated they might one day participate, maybe, but only specific causes if it was something they really cared about, or they would participate to be more engaging to their followers. So if it made them more entertaining to their followers, then they would participate. Now, the differences that we found between when the students were answering the survey questions, what you trust, told us then when we asked them what they had most recently engaged with, or their level of knowledge of social issues and then their desire to participate in things like the Ice Bucket Challenge leaves some open question. It leaves maybe some potential gaps or some provocations in what people know and trust about online sources versus what they're doing when you ask them, okay, well, what did you recently do online? Our data showed a relationship between time spent online and reported awareness of social issues. Now, this is congruent with the literature that shows that repeated exposure to sustainability-related messages on a variety of online sources is connected to an increased awareness of those issues. Now, additionally, we saw that people who self-reported an average level of knowledge of social issues spent the most time online, which could confirm some of the literature that suggests that people who think they know a little bit but not too much about an issue will be more likely to seek out information. So people could be going to seek out information online, and that also confirms the fact that people were still engaging with issues-based information and news. Now, interestingly enough, those with a low level of reported knowledge, they spent less time online than both of the other two groups. So it could be because of something like the Dunning-Kruger effect, or it could be that they just weren't interested, they didn't know enough to know what they didn't know, or maybe they had a low level of knowledge because they weren't spending time online. Now, when it came to the frequency of reading blogs, though, our data suggests that those people with the highest reported knowledge were more likely to report reading blogs on a daily basis. This could be great. If the blogs are grounded in evidence and scientific inquiry, this could represent an opportunity to reach people with that information that could empower action rather than slacktivism. However, we don't know yet. As this is an exploratory study, we don't know yet what kind of blogs they're reading. So they could also be reading blogs that are confirming an erroneous belief. They could be reading blogs that are, just allowing them to think what they already know to be true, and that's why they're spending so much time reading them. So these are also the people most likely to share information. So if misinformation is traveling this way, people are confirming already existing knowledge, spending the most time of all of our groups reading blogs and then sharing that information when it isn't correct. That could be an opening in which misinformation spread could potentially occur. Now, as this was an exploratory study, we did not have the means to test for actual knowledge of social issues at this time. But so right now it's an open question. The perceived knowledge of social issues could be absolutely correct. They might know exactly what they think, or they might know exactly the accurate thing on the social issues. But the likelihood is that at least some of them are experiencing some version of Dunning-Kruger in which they may have a low level of knowledge, but they don't know that they have a low level of knowledge and they're incorrectly assessing their own level of knowledge. And then in that case, the time they're spending online is correlating only with an increase of their own perception of their knowledge. So I think that I know more because I'm spending time online versus actually gaining new information because I'm spending time online. Now, though our participants report finding the news most engaging online when you ask them, oh yeah, what do you find engaging? And they report issues-based and scientific information as being very, very engaging. Of course, when you're asking them about their most recent experiences interacting with and sharing content, which are two measures of engagement, they more often report sharing or engaging with information that is entertaining, instructional, and they're telling us that they're sharing because it's connecting them with family and friends. So this also shows a disconnect where misinformation spread could occur. Because people are reflecting on their online activity, they know what to trust, and they know what they're supposed to say when you give them a survey question. But that doesn't necessarily mean that in real life, sharing is fulfilling that purpose. People aren't necessarily sharing or engaging with content because they're looking to get more informed on the issue. They're sharing and engaging with content, they told us, because, hey, it's fun, or it's engaging for my followers, or mostly because I want to connect with families and friends. And this sort of maintains consistency when you're asking them about, well, are you going to move beyond an online engagement with the issue and do something that requires some activity? Now, the Ice Bucket Challenge was a pretty low bar to ask them about. Again, that's just doing something, filming a video, and then again posting it online. We're not asking them necessarily to, write to their local MP or to even go out and participate in a march or anything else. But that was at least taking an activity and moving it from online to something you actually have to go out physically to. Now, the majority of our respondents have not participated in anything like that yet, and many of them even indicated that they would never do it. They're not interested in doing that sort of thing. They think it's too trendy and it's, you know, too weird, or maybe they would only do it for an issue that they cared about, but they haven't found that issue yet. And some of them even indicated that they preferred to engage in online activities that didn't take too much effort. So they would rather click, you know, through up to a link, sign an online petition, or maybe use a hashtag than actually going out and doing something that requires mobilization in the real world. So this is not to say that online tools can't be useful for organizing. We know that they're useful for organizing. But I think you already have to be motivated to organize offline and just be using that to facilitate. And that's more the connection, again, between what is happening in, you know, out on mainstream media or what is happening in your groups, in your communities, and then using online tools to mobilize, not the other way around. Now, in text answers, our respondents indicated visiting entertainment sites quite a bit, even though they stated in multiple choice answers that they know they're going to trust academic journals or they're going to trust news sources as preferred sources of information. Now, this contradiction in the data may be an indication of a disconnect between what people know they should find trustworthy and how they actually spend their time online. This potential paradox could provide a clue, again, to the spread of mis and disinformation around issues online. It suggests that we have to do more than just provide people with instructions on what sites are trustworthy or where to go. Like, we can educate people, and clearly they're picking up on the message of, you know, where do you find trustworthy information? But that's not necessarily what they're immediately going to share in the moment. So we need to encourage more reflexivity around the whole process of engaging with information. And it may be necessary to find other ways, like nudges, to change online habits. And this will require a deeper understanding of the different social and emotional needs that are being met when we share. We're not, you know, as much as Google you know, likes to be the world's library, and as much as I think the students, when I talk to them, they think that Google does make them smarter, it does make them more informed. If we are engaging in bad information hygiene, sharing blogs that already confirm our existing points of view with a small group of people who we already want to connect with, then those tools are not being realized to their full potential. And is it slacktivism? Well, despite the fact that many of our group perceive they possess an average or greater knowledge of social and environmental issues, they also indicated that they're not really interested in participating in an online campaign that requires public visibility. Some of them don't see the point, some of them think it's stupid, that sort of thing. Now, even the Ice Bucket Challenge, as I mentioned before, has kind of been critiqued itself for sort of being limited in its effectiveness, but that's a low bar for saying, okay, well, let's do something. And I sort of think of it as the minimum needed to, you know, move beyond clicktivism or slacktivism. But in the case of our respondents, the tendency was, well, I'm going to be more likely to share information. I'm not sure that I really want to participate in these things. Is it slacktivism? If they're really becoming more informed, depending on what sites they're visiting, what blogs they're visiting. We know, for example, that they know where to trust information. So it doesn't have to be slacktivism if it is increasing their engagement in other ways. However, we simply don't have the evidence yet to know whether an increase in information is being correlated with positive changes like, you know, being more likely to go out and vote. So the takeaways are people know which sites they should trust for information, but they're not necessarily sharing or engaging with them when you ask them about their most recent interactions. Now, people are sharing with content for entertainment purposes and mostly to maintain relationships with one another. We know that in our group, the people who spent more time reading blogs perceive their knowledge of environmental issues to be higher. This could mean that they're learning about the issues online. Could also mean that their perception is erroneous or misinformed. And people reporting a higher knowledge of social issues are more likely to report sharing online. Now, they're spending less time online, but are more likely to share information. And this maybe could be a decrease in information seeking. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, it almost raises more questions than it answers. So future directions, of course, are to measure the actual knowledge of social issues, comparing them to self-reported knowledge and time spent online. I think a diary study would be useful to determine what blogs and websites people are visiting. For example, if that high level of blog use is correlated with blogs that, are produced by the Social Media Lab, for example, that's a good thing. But if it's blogs, published by climate change deniers, maybe not so good. And also, a diary study would help us get a better idea of what people are sharing over longer periods of time, rather than just the snapshot that we were able to collect with this survey. And then finally, it would be great to do some more in-depth interviews to determine the gap between what people report finding engaging or what they trust and what they regularly interact with. So, for example, I know I'm supposed to trust academic journals. I know I'm supposed to trust science-related websites, but, I'm not sharing them because they're boring or what have you. We could get more details on that sort of thing. And thank you. I'm now excited to take questions.
Actually, I had a question. When you showed us social media use, what are the percentages? It was around 10 to 15% for YouTube and Facebook. If you go back to your list.
Yeah. So, between 10 and 15%.
So out of 100%, they had to rank.
Yeah, they had to rank them in order of importance. So about, 12% would rank YouTube first in order of importance. Yes.
Did you notice any difference between, since YouTube was the high one there, between blogs or vlogs, vlogs?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And at the time, we didn't think to break it down between vlogs, vlogs, and you'll notice we don't have podcasts on here either, which is something that if I went back and did it today, I would absolutely add in, and TikTok as well, right? These things change so fast that it's almost like by the time you get the survey results, numbers crunched, you're already onto the next thing. But yeah, that's a good question. And I was surprised that there was such a large number of people that actually reported reading blogs. Initially, I was the sole member of the research team that said, why are you even putting blogs on there? Nobody reads blogs anymore. But I'm glad that they fought me on that because we got some interesting data. Yeah.
I wonder if, I guess, maybe the next part of this study, or if you consider for this part of the stage of the study, what participants themselves defined as action, right? So, well, I'm sure it's not this true. Like it's, because there's all these, when we look at them, right, saying, well, there might be necessary correlation to this and this, but do people actually believe, what do they believe clicking online actually is, right?
Yeah.
And then what do they distinguish? I mean, I think most people do distinguish between like an embodied experience section versus, so I guess more like, was there an opportunity to ask more conceptual questions about action and experience?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's part of what I'd like to do with the interviews. Because, it became a very long survey, and I'm only reporting, a subset of our questions here. So we didn't get to answer that question. But one of the interesting things that came up when we asked them about the Ice Bucket Challenge was that I think people are getting savvier to the corporate side of online participation. Like a lot of people just indicated that they felt it was too trendy. It was, kind of commoditized. They didn't use that term, but and so they really weren't interested in being a part of that thing. And it sounded like people were pulling back, or some of them at least were feeling like they were pulling back from engaging online. So they're consuming information. They're not posting online because they don't feel like they want to be part of that, and they don't want their information used in that way. So I think there's probably a link in there between action and maybe they are doing things but not necessarily connecting them to online because that's not how they want to engage right now. We did ask an interesting question that I didn't talk about here, but we gave them different messages, and we said, which message do you find most engaging? And it was sort of like, there's the polar ice caps are melting and we're all going to die. And then there was a very scientific, like, this is the habitat of the Sumatran tiger and this is happening to it. And again, when they were asked about the different types of messaging, from the really emotional and like fear-mongering ones to like a hopeful one to the very scientific and dry one, they were picking the dry one. as being most engaging? And I'd really like to drill down on that too a little more. Why do you tell me, because I'm not engaged with this message, like I was bored writing it. Why are you telling me that, the habitat of the Sumatran tiger is the most, engaging message versus some of the ones with more emotional arousal? Yeah.
I was interested in your discussion about knowledge and the levels of knowledge, and people either report it or lack of knowledge. But I'm also interested in sort of the praxis that comes out of having knowledge. People, I think, make assumptions about social media that social media can be a driver for social change. But I think we've seen that it may not necessarily be so, because people may not link knowledge to action, like the consciousness behind it. And I'm wondering if, on the climate change, for instance, it's perfectly wonderful to go to a protest or sign a petition, that type of thing. But we're not really talking about the power structures that keep climate change at where it is. And so if people are going to actually engage in social action to bring about real change, fundamental change, rather than just, politicians saying it's really important, vote for us, we're going to do stuff, things like that. I'm wondering how you can probe the role of social media as, as a driver of consciousness, that real change orientate. I don't know if you can or not, but it's something that I know. I think a lot of students, communication students that I teach, they get frustrated because they say, I can attend rallies and things when nothing's going to change, so why bother, right? So how do you flip that to say, I'm going to participate because I know it's going to help move it ahead, whatever.
Yeah, so I think two things about that. So I returned to the literature that shows that when we give information to people, they are more likely to act, and particularly like with climate change as a case study. But I'm not entirely sure that social media is the best place for that information. Because, it seems to me that the relational factors and the entertainment factors that drive most of the sharing are not always compatible with providing the kind of information that you need to inspire that action. But one of the things that I want to do with the diary studies is to look at what people are sharing in more real time over a period of time to sort of see if there is the potential, even if there's an initiative that can work its way in there to provide information of the type that will inspire or be more likely to inspire some kind of action.
So are you, in terms of measurements of knowledge, right? I guess it would be very difficult to create that, your measurements, right? Because, see, you've kept the terminology really simple, from low to high versus like a kind of deep learning or something. So the intent is to just really the perception of, I guess, more quantity and rather than this kind of deep learning.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is give them some sort of quiz to assess their knowledge of a specific issue. So say we could pick climate change rather than environmental and social issues more broadly. And then, so we give them a quiz that assesses their actual knowledge, and we also administer a survey that, what do you think your level of knowledge is on this issue? And then asking maybe a series of questions to even get at their level of knowledge of different aspects of climate change, what they think it is versus what objectively we can perceive it to be. And of course, it's all problematic, right? But I think that will get us a little closer to understanding whether these gaps exist and what the role is of their potentially internet, social media use in maybe filling those gaps or maybe making them worse.
One of the things I'm interested in is how the design or policies of different platforms could influence how people are sharing on them. And I wonder if there were any differences across how people ranked the importance of different platforms, if that correlated with their sharing.
And we didn't find any statistically significant correlations between those things. Now, that's not to say that they don't exist. Our N was quite small, right? But yeah, amongst our group, we didn't see that.
So you had a very precise population, very
Yeah.
educated, and perhaps they expected you to answer them in a certain way. That's why they said maybe news
In academic journals, yeah.
I was just curious, how would you expect results would be similar or different for other demographic groups? Maybe middle age or older adults? Did you, based on literature perhaps?
Yeah, I would suggest that maybe people aren't going to indicate academic journals as most trustworthy in the general population, but I think that some of the results will maintain the same. Like, general population will probably say in a survey that, they like news. Let's see if we can find it. That they trust news and government, even though there would probably be a subsection of people who say, oh no, I don't trust news or government. But I imagine that many of these would stay the same, with the exception of journals may move a little bit in the list. I would still think that, Reddit, just because it's so few people use it, it would probably remain low on the list. Facebook may or may not rise up a little bit. I think that if we were looking at maybe an older demographic of people, we might have seen more engagement with things like the Ice Bucket Challenge, or we might have seen sort of different uses of, Facebook for engagement. A lot of our respondents reported sharing videos, for example, and that may or may not be consistent across demographic groups at this time.
The reason I ask this question is because some of the work we've done on political engagement during this federal election, we noticed that because climate change was such a polarizing and political issue in this campaign, I would expect there would be a huge difference in terms of what sources general public use to educate or share information on topics like climate change, and some of them who might have different party affiliations would not necessarily trust government websites, potentially. So perhaps asking for the preference in terms of political parties, if you were to expand the study to the general population, might be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think you're right that there could be a political component there as to, where people decide that they can go for trustworthy information.
You mentioned the idea of using nudges as a means to address the circulation.
I know it's problematic.
Misinformation. I was just wondering whether you kind of drilled down a bit further into that, whether you were thinking at the platform level or whether this is sort of a regulatory sort of nudge.
Yeah, to be honest, we haven't obviously tested it. It's just a hypothesis. So if people know already, or this group, for example, knows what to trust, but they're not tending to share it, then there may need to be other means of making certain content more shareable. So probably at the platform level, although I'm very skeptical about that, I'm not sure that we could do a government-related nudge without really impeding people's, autonomy and freedom. And so I don't think I'd want to go there. But I do also have interest in how user experience design can help make things more seamless, more shareable for people. And I think that adopting a user experience approach to how we design communication might help, particularly for those people who are sharing for entertainment. That I think not that science is not always entertaining and policy is not always entertaining, but there may be ways to better design the communication to make it more likely to catch people's eye.
So I'm curious, what do you think about Google's approach and YouTube's platform approach to kind of downgrade popularity of certain types of content like anti-vaccination videos? Do you feel or find, based on what research, that's an effective strategy? So instead of nudging to pay attention to certain relevant information, maybe hiding or ranking down certain non-scientific information. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, if you make it unsearchable, then maybe. But because we've found that people are sharing to maintain relational ties, I think that there's just so many places that you can go to find information, right? If it's not on Google, you might go to Reddit or you might go to 4chan, et cetera, et cetera. If you really want to, follow that conspiracy theory down the rabbit hole because that's the community that you're involved in, I think that it will maybe help new people not find it as easily if you make it unsearchable. But I think it takes a combination of technological and really social initiatives to fix this, because we need to understand what people are getting from their membership in these communities that are sharing the misinformation, because the relational piece isn't necessarily addressed through technological fixes.
I'm just curious, there's a big debate now about how if we gravitate towards only creating content that is highly engaging, then that means a certain type of science will always get favor status, and certain other type of science nobody will care about because it's not cute utility. So I mean, by advocating or for policymakers and educators to basically create content that they know will have legs versus content that they know will die a quiet death, are we not then pushing for certain types of science to be featured and certain to just disappear?
Yeah, well, I mean, we already have that problem, right, with which science gets awarded grants, or, you know, which professors get promoted and that sort of thing. And you're right. I mean, it could potentially exacerbate the problem. And part of the reason why we have the spread of misinformation is because misinformation is so darn engaging, right? And conspiracy theories, they're great, very exciting. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, right? So yes, maybe nudges that, you know, reduce the searchability of some content is important. Maybe teaching scientists how to create the most engaging content possible is important. But you know what? A municipal budget is probably never going to be engaging, no matter how you present it. So then we also need to find out what are those relational levers to make it relevant to people. I think there's probably a community element, and I think that there's a huge social, economic, and, you know, journalism angle as well. That is tied into this. So it's a very complex problem that will require many little solutions to fully address.
Thank you for the interesting presentation.
All right, well,
this is a gift from all of us at the Social Media Lab.
thank you, everyone, and thank you all for coming.